The morning sun glared off the blue police tape stretched tight across the driveway. Detective Miller ducked under the barrier, his boots crunching rhythmically into the loose gravel. He checked his watch. 8 o'clock sharp. The silence of the South Carolina estate felt heavy, pressing against the ears, far removed from the usual hum of the nearby town. He walked toward the main entrance, noting the lack of movement inside. No sirens, no chatter, just the stillness of a property held in limbo. Inside the kitchen, the air was stale. A half-finished cup of coffee sat centered on the island. A thin, gray film of dust had already claimed the surface, settling into the dregs of what should have been a morning routine. Miller looked at the cup, then at the stillness of the room. It was not the scene of a life being lived, but a life being suddenly, violently interrupted. 3 days of investigation had yielded little, but as he stepped further into the hallway, he felt the quiet start to give way. The search for the truth was only just beginning. Miller pulled a tablet from his bag, the screen glowing bright against the dim kitchen light. He swiped past the initial incident reports to the autopsy summary. The cause of death was not a sudden medical failure, but a complex interaction of foreign substances. He tapped the screen, bringing up the timeline logs. A witness statement from the house next door provided the first crack in the narrative. At 10 o'clock the night before, she had been pacing her porch for over an hour. She carried a thick stack of legal documents, moving with a frantic, repetitive rhythm that suggested she was waiting for a threat to arrive. By 11:30, the house went dark. When the housekeeper arrived the next morning, the front door was unlocked and standing slightly ajar. Miller moved toward the hallway, where the floor was crowded with cardboard boxes. Tape hung loose from the flaps. She had been preparing to leave, and she had been in a hurry. The evidence pointed away from a quiet night of rest and toward a calculated, desperate attempt to vanish. Miller stared at the boxes, the reality of the situation sharpening into focus. She was not dying in place. She was running for her life. Miller stepped into the living room, his eyes sweeping the floor until they locked onto a point near the fireplace. A glass lay in pieces, the shards scattered across the hardwood like jagged teeth. He signaled the forensics team. They moved in, picking through the debris with tweezers and lights. The analysis was precise and damning. Deep within the residue, they found traces of an unknown sedative, a compound that did not exist in any medical record found in the home. This was not a self-inflicted end. Miller turned to the monitor where the security feed played on a loop. The timestamp flickered. 12 a.m. A black SUV sat idling at the very edge of the driveway, its engine running, its presence heavy in the dead of night. He zoomed in on the bumper, but a thick layer of mud obscured the license plate. The car had been waiting. It had been watching. The predator knew exactly when to strike. Miller stood in the center of the room, the silence now replaced by the cold logic of a manhunt. The transition was absolute. This was no longer a tragic accident. It was a targeted, calculated death. Miller stepped out into the garden, the damp soil clinging to his boots as he walked the perimeter. The forensics team had been digging near the rose bushes for 20 minutes. One of them signaled him over, pointing to a small metallic glint buried beneath the mulch. Miller knelt, using a gloved hand to sift through the dirt. He pulled out a set of keys, 2 of them attached to a heavy brass tag stamped with a transit station logo. These were not house keys. They belonged to a locker, a location she had never mentioned to anyone in her inner circle. He turned the keys over in his palm, the cold weight of them confirming his worst suspicions. She had been planning to disappear, and someone had stopped her before she could reach the station. Miller stood up, his face hardening as he looked back at the house. The evidence was no longer a collection of fragments. It was a roadmap to her final, desperate actions. He pulled out his radio, his voice sharp and authoritative. He formally reclassified the death as a homicide investigation. The game had shifted. They were no longer looking for an accident, but for a killer who had been watching from the shadows. He looked toward the perimeter where the first news vans were pulling into view, and he knew the hunt had only just begun. The perimeter fence groaned under the weight of the encroaching media. Flashes ignited the morning air, and reporters shouted names, but Miller kept his back to the chaos. He ignored the noise, his focus narrowed to the brass keys in his hand. If the black SUV was the hunter, the locker was the destination she never reached. He dialed his captain, his voice cutting through the static of the surrounding frenzy. "The locker is the key," he stated, the realization landing with the weight of absolute certainty. Every box in the hallway, every document she had been holding, pointed to a life already being packed away. She had been terrified, running from a shadow that had finally caught her. Miller looked back at the house, then toward the distant transit station. The investigation had moved beyond the estate. The locker waited in the city, holding the secrets that would finally name her pursuer. The mystery of the black SUV was the beginning, but the truth was locked away, waiting for a key that had been found too late. He turned and walked toward his car, leaving the cameras behind. The hunt was no longer about the death. It was about the desperate, final secret she had died trying to protect.